All righty, here we go again. Today we have Joe Fullman from The Onion, and one of the things I love about this talk is that he takes ideas that I thought I had and the answers that I thought I knew, and by the end of his talk, I was like, how could I have everything wrong? And he just proved it. It's I think, a fascinating discussion of digital media and some of our assumptions and how we can go from there and where we ought to be thinking.
All right.
Joe, thank you.
Thank you. Before I get started, just like background on who I am and why I'm talking about this. Like at a journalism conference, I'm an audience dev guy, not a journalist, and thus I'm a little bit in enemy territory probably. And some of the things that I would say here, I would say before we get started, are not like necessarily our standard operating procedure across every brand at Fusion Media Group. Raju talked about like our full portfolio in the last session in this room. And a lot of the things that I'm going to talk about today are pretty specific to the way that The Onion works and the other two brands that we have at Onion Inc., AV Club, and Clickhole. So I'm not here to talk about The Onion today specifically. Like this is not a talk about The Onion, but I am going to talk about it anyway. That's the marketer in me. I'll share three principles that shape our distribution strategy, and they've been really important for us because we've faced a lot of the same pressures that any other publisher has out there. The difference as a satire publisher is really we can't hire more freelance and just increase our output. We can't kind of shift our process on a dime the way a lot of newsrooms have in order to be successful in this environment. We're kind of stuck with like this intense quality control. There's 150 headlines pitched for every single Onion headline that actually makes it to our sites. So that puts a sort of burden on us to figure out how to move the needle without messing with the things that people love about The Onion. And depending on which version of the legend you believe, The Onion is this multi-trillion-dollar company that was founded in 1765 that owns like 40 cable networks, or it is a alternative weekly that really started out on college campuses as a free handout. That was the beginning of where we started. We started at University of Wisconsin. This is actually the first issue. Today, though, we reach 200 million people per month across platforms, so including O&O and social. And that begs the question, before we kind of get into how we've adapted, like where did we come from? So how did we get to be as big as we are? The story of The Onion, it starts in 1988 or 1765, depending on who you believe. But it really gets interesting on the internet of the 1990s. And the thing about that is, we didn't set out ever to be this digital company. This is the first headline that really made it onto the internet. The end of 1995, we basically found that our content was already being passed around on listservs and other things that people did in 1995 on the internet. And we realized that, hey, maybe we could make a buck, right? Like we are an entertainment organization first and foremost. We serve a journalistic function, but we are always out to make a quick buck if we can. And this at the time seemed like, hey, maybe it was something to do. One employee, actually on the editorial side, started our first website and convinced the then EIC to basically take us into this brave new world. We launched in 1996, and a couple of months later, this little startup called NewYorkTimes.com launched their own competing edition of an online newspaper. And over the last 30 years, we've both found a place that we can call our niche. We were really catapulted by the web to national prominence, but it was not like a really big part of our business. It's the reason why our print business was able to expand. So we started at the University of Wisconsin-Madison in 1988. By, I guess, the early 2000s, we had about 30 different franchised weeklies, all distributed across the country on Thursdays. And those weeklies, were our bread and butter. But the key to getting that distribution was the internet. Like, this was not a money-making venture for the first 15 years, probably. If you think about the time that we were launching, it was this moment when everybody thought they were going to get really, really rich in online advertising. So broadcast.com was worth $6 billion to Google or to Yahoo. Google didn't even exist. And that's crazy, right? Like, this was a website that had like a couple 100,000 visitors. But there was promise to that. And with all that crazy money going around, it made this amazing human being super duper wealthy, which I guess is something we can all regret ever since then. But that was the sort of twilight, because in 2001, the bubble really burst. The appetite for online advertising just really dried up. The business model changed fundamentally in a couple of months, and the print revenue was really what was the differentiator, right? Like, you had really, really big, smart things going on. Like, think Inside.com, like, gone overnight. Think, any of these like major digital publishing brands that didn't have a newspaper at that moment in time were pretty much gone, or a shell of what they had been after the dot-com bubble. So, it allowed us to build this national print weekly circulation, and that in turn allowed us to sort of start to evolve out of being purely a newspaper that had some content available online to being really a web publisher. And then everything changed again, right? Like, the iPhone changed everything for better or worse. And people were not reading alternative weeklies the same way, right? Like, the mobile internet was still not yet a thing in 2007 the way it is now. But it was enough to really disrupt our business model, which led us to get into satirical cable news.
An attractive witness described the event in breathless terms.
I went to my window and I was like, whoa, there's some bullshit happening.
That happened right over there. I'm an older man, so you can trust what I say.
Authorities in special uniforms rushed to the scene to stand around while our cameras filmed them. Our reporter Keith Collins joins us now live from the scene of the bullshit through the use of expensive technology. Good to be with you again, Keith. We have a colorful graphic here that shows instances of bullshit like this are on the rise. Is that right?
Yes, although why is unclear. Some say it's because of one fucking reason. Others say it's because of some other fucking reason. I talked to this random expert on the subject who told me this thing you're about to hear him say right after he points at a piece of paper.
I spent my entire life attending the nation to talk about bullshit like this. I'm really just happy to be on TV.
Now let's see if we can drag this out a little longer by showing emails written by some of our viewers. I once saw some stuff kind of like the shit you're talking about happen. I have nothing more to add. Another person says, I am angry that things like this happen. I get mad about every bullshit thing I see. So obviously a lot of opinions there to make this story seem somewhat meaningful.
Oh, absolutely, Glenn. This bullshit.
So I will spare you the rest of that very long clip. There's going to be a couple times that I do that throughout this presentation, because I think it's important to kind of look at some of this content to just have some context for it. But like, that was a 30-minute show that was made long before there was any real digital distribution for video, right? Like when we started ONN, IFC show, we really didn't have an opportunity to distribute video online, and then Facebook changed everything again. And like, whereas the brands on the GMG side of the FMG house are not super social centric, like that's actually a point of pride and part of the DNA that I think Nick Denton left them with. Like we've been very much in the mix on all of this social stuff since day one. Like that's been a really, really big part of our business model. Because I think at the end of the day, nobody needs to read satire at all. Like you're wasting time whenever you're reading The Onion. And it's a great waste of time. Like it's my favorite waste of time, and I hope you all waste a lot of time and don't use ad blockers when you do it. But Facebook came in and really disrupted what we were doing overall, because not only did it really change, again, things like video distribution down the road, things like, the way news consumption worked, it also had the side effect of killing our newspaper, at least in print, right? Because the bottom dropped out of the online advertising market in 2001. It dropped out in like 2010, 2011, really when we were kind of at our peak distribution. And it was still a profitable enterprise when we let it go, but the trouble with investing in print moving forward for us was it had always been a free product, and we had this like fundamental choice to make. Like we could either start to try to make you pay for it now, or we could, like push that out in the future, which is a recurring theme. Push like that day of reckoning out into the future a little bit longer by ending the print edition. So that happened in 2013. We told everybody in Madison, Wisconsin to go riot, which I think now we probably wouldn't do. But times have changed. But what we really needed was a better value proposition. And that better value proposition was basically getting out of the display business, at least like as our primary business, because programmatic, especially in 2013, was essentially AdWords. That was about the going rate. Now that's like the bargain basement. That is the worst inventory on your site, the worst monetized inventory on your site, which is why everybody has Taboola and their ilk. You can't really eat off of programmatic. You're not gonna run a profitable, real journalistic enterprise just off of programmatic. It's really, really hard. And it's nearly impossible. Like we've always had a high proportion of direct sales compared to a lot of other publishers, just because it is easy to sell The Onion as like a unique opportunity, because The Onion is really unique as publications go. There is no other satirical news organization at the same size and scale that we have. But you can't really project out 6 months, 12 months of work based off of your close rate today. And I know this is like, for those of you who are still in school, like the minute you land in the newsroom, depending on where you land, obviously, but the minute you land in the newsroom, you start to hear about all of this stuff like, are we going to make the quarter? How is our close rate doing with these direct initiatives, especially if you're in a place that does a lot of branded? You can't say because we had a 20% close rate in Q3, next Q3 we're going to have a 20% close rate. You can for the sake of financial reporting, but you can't if you're saying like, I'm going to make a really risky decision to hire 10 more people, and I want them fully funded, and I don't want there to be any chance that I have to let somebody go. And that was kind of the position that relying so heavily on direct sales of media put us in. And now with 4 years of hindsight, I think like we can really say that that the end result of making that shift was that we have a much more vital business because the bottom has really dropped out of the direct sold advertising business, online like display business. And so that put us in a position where we really needed to evolve our monetization strategy.
According to unanimous reports from consumers across the nation this week, branded media content and sponsored posts distributed by print and digital publications are pretty fucking awesome. The vast majority of Americans reported that, all things considered, seeing their favorite websites and magazines covered in articles written and paid for by corporate brands is, quote, just the best.
First of all, sponsored content is really fucking cool. There's no debate there. When I see a sponsored post, I gain a lot of respect for the website and for the company that's selling their product too.
According to a poll conducted this week, roughly 92% of Americans reported regularly looking forward to not only reading sponsored posts, but also sharing large volumes of corporate messages with all of their friends.
I would probably say that I'm happiest when I'm tricked into watching a web video that's designed almost exclusively to sell me a product. It doesn't feel insulting to my intelligence, and it's just like a really, really cool thing, you know? I mean, what can I say? Sponsored content is fun and awesome and the best.
Eat McDonald's. It's great.
And that is exactly where we have gone. You know, a large proportion of our revenue comes from native content. Our native content, I think, is contextually a little bit different than how it exists inside of different type of newsroom. But it's a mix of people. So we have our Onion Labs logo down there. Onion Labs is our like in-house ad agency, essentially. They do stuff that both appears inside of the Onion, as well as the Onion, right? With the dingbat. And they also do stuff that will run as 15s on TV or run on a client's Facebook page. So there's a real range of content that we create at this point, but the key to shoring up the overall business at that moment in time was to have the combination of display and native together. Because people are still obviously buying, direct buying display advertising. It's just that, you know, to close that deal, you need to have a better strategy to close. So that didn't insulate us from yet more change, right? And if we're using the metaphor of, you know, web publishers as mammoths, our days are numbered. It is not a safe place to be, like where we are from a monetization standpoint at the Onion. It is safe right now, but like, there's no chance that we won't get disrupted like 5 more times in fundamental ways over the next couple of years. And I think like the biggest, most dangerous one is that we've already, you know, passed this peak website point. I think like the metaphor would be peak oil, right? So like we have already made more money from our website than we're ever gonna make. So what does that mean? It means that, you know, websites are now declining in importance, which is like weirdly heretical, I think, especially being in a company that is now comprised of us and Gizmodo, because they are very website centric. But over time, like over a very long time, I do think like the website is not going to be a super important place to at least make money, if not distribute your content. It doesn't mean we're moving the AV Club to Medium though. It does mean that we need to monetize our social audience on social platforms, because, you know, most of 200 million people are not coming to our website, unfortunately. That'd be a fantastic story for me to tell, but it is not true. Social platforms though, while we need to be there playing where they let us play, like we can't expect them to kick in meaningful amounts of money just because we have no way of controlling that, you know? Like we can say, we expect this. We can go to all the meetings with Facebook and be like, we're stakeholders in the ecosystem and we expect this. But like, there's absolutely no chance that they have any reason to change their strategy for our sake, which just means we need to be smarter about what we're doing. But I think like it's important to think, why did websites peak? I think there's a billion reasons, but there are 4 that I think stick out to me. So I think one big one is ad block. So 50% of 18 to 34-year-old web users employ ad block. It's bad for publishers, it's bad for the brand. Basically for the publishers, it is basically paying more to reach the same number of people to deliver ads. Like if you have guaranteed X number of people in a demo, or you've guaranteed X number of impressions, you're in a position to then like have to deliver on that. For brand, I think, you know, content marketing versus display advertising then becomes the easiest way to scale messaging. And there's an important distinction even there, like where is that native advertising being served from? Because if you're pushing it out through DoubleClick or some other ad server in order to report back to your clients, then you're still kind of stuck behind that ad block wall. We've done some experimentation asking people to whitelist, and a lot of people will whitelist us, like give us back access to put ads on there. But in the long term, like, you know, the stuff coming out with Safari, or now has come out with Safari, and you know, the long-term health of that display ecosystem is not fantastic because of all these ad block issues. The second is that daily mobile minutes from 2013 until now have increased 68%, which, you know, is crazy because it's not all time in browser. Almost none of it is in browser. And therefore, the number of direct entry visits has gone down for almost everybody. Like the number of people who type in on a mobile browser nytimes.com or theonion.com or gizmodo.com is really, really small. Like that is mostly a desktop behavior. And as we see desktop usage decline over time, I think we would expect to see direct traffic similarly decline. Now, depending on how you think about what app traffic is, or what notification traffic is, or what email traffic is, I think those to me are all flavors of different kinds of direct traffic, but it's not like somebody being like, I have to go every hour and check and see what new post is up on my favorite website. And the reality is that every media company's partner is the social networks, and chief among them is Facebook. Like, I will talk so much about Facebook in this presentation, and it's not because I love Facebook. I sometimes am accused by ornery editorial folks of like liking the Facebook stuff that I have to serve them, right? Like it is what's on offer, so we either take it or we don't. And it is a meaningful amount of traffic to us, a meaningful amount of revenue for our teams. And so we are basically stuck dealing with that. But even there, like that landscape is in flux. So last time I spoke at this conference, I had a slide that was like basically about the massive increase in Facebook time between 15 and 16, or between 14 and 15. Now, like that situation has reversed basically. So if you look at total minutes in ComScore, it's crazy. So YouTube has consistently increased if we're looking 18 to 49 in total minutes. And the reason minutes are the operative metric here, I think, is minutes are comparable across WhatsApp and Instagram and Facebook. Like thinking about things in page views is probably not useful in a lot of non-traditional publisher-driven display contexts, right? Like if we're thinking about a social network, fundamentally we have to think like the only way to compare Twitter and Instagram is in the number of minutes a month or the number of minutes a day. So what we've seen is that there's been this steady decline of time spent on Facebook. And at first, it looked like that was going to be just Facebook core app product. It turns out that it's actually like Facebook overall. There's some bright spots in that story, and it changes month to month, but really like there is a downward pressure on those numbers. If we look at it as daily user time, though, it gets really, really interesting, because there, like in September 2015, we saw 50 minutes a day of usage of Facebook products, and that's now gone down to 35. Part of that is they've continued to add more users, and the new users tend to be people sort of at the margins of who you would expect to be Facebook users. A lot of older people and a lot of people who are maybe not on a smartphone all day. And that, and even those demographic, cuts don't fully explain how you go from 50 to 35 other than just video, right? Like we've become so video centric, and you can see that in this chart with the YouTube numbers. So YouTube just like steadily climbing. If you were to discount from 15 to 17 the number of minutes spent watching video on Facebook, it would be an even bleaker story. So Facebook is in a position where like we are mad at them because we're like, hey, we would love you to serve our text, like our written content, our link posts. That is what is important for our business. And it feels like they are trying to hurt us sometimes. But in reality, like they are not doing as well as you would think they are. That doesn't mean they're like not more profitable than they were before. It doesn't mean they're not making more money overall even. It just means that the shape of the business has changed. If you look at in minutes per day though, Twitter and Snapchat, like you see, like we have a very large Twitter following for Onion. I think it's one of the biggest publisher Twitter follower counts. And routinely are like 250, 300,000 email subscribers will be a bigger share of our traffic than people driven directly by our posts on Twitter. That's not to say like retweets and other things driving in sort of dark social, but it is not a meaningful amount of traffic in the way that Facebook is and has been. And Snapchat or Instagram, right? Like there's just no real like replacing driving back to the website and pulling you into an experience that we control. So that's been a big issue for us. And I think that's where it goes to a really, really interesting chart. Like this is to an audience dev person, this is the most interesting chart that I've seen in a while. We use Social Flow. A lot of other media companies use Social Flow to push out organic content. And it is seeing a drop. They are seeing a drop, basically, in reach and clicks across the board for publisher categories. And I think what that really reflects is there's less available after they try to push you into every video experience they possibly could, or some engrossing, like I don't know if you've used Forever Basketball, the native game inside of Facebook Messenger, but like very addictive, very dumb, but keeps you in that ComScore minute count for way longer than you would. So all these things are kind of tricks that they're using, the way that publishers have traditionally used tricks to kind of keep you in. And then, all of that is to basically say that there's these 4 things that are pushing on us, making it really, really hard to succeed. And I would think that by 2025 at the very latest, maybe even 2020, you'll see an end to success for publishers who haven't changed beyond the couple of things that I'm going to talk about now. I think the couple of things, the 3 Ds, these 3 principles of distribution, are really things that are going to forestall the future. They're not things that are like the long-term roadmap. I'll talk a little bit about that at the very, very end, but I wanted to make that distinction. But so these are the actual 3 Ds, right? The 3 Ds of distribution, 3 Ds of content marketing. What we're really trying to do is slow down the future. It's coming at us really, really fast, as it always has been. And like whatever degree that we can get in front of that, we can have a little bit more control over our own fate. So just to kind of level set, we think about traffic across kind of 3 areas. So on this side, there's impressions, and that's really where my team comes in. So that's the responsibility of marketing and social. Like, we are figuring out how to get it in front of as many people as possible. Editorial really can only control, they can only really control click-through rate, right? Like, they can write better content. And sometimes that doesn't even translate into click-through rate, but that's where they have some agency in this. And then on the product side, there's really a question of pages per entrance, which are, I would argue, like the most important contributions to how you think about traffic, how you monetize traffic. There's a humongous difference between getting 500,000 entrances from Facebook in a day with 1 page view. Let's say you're driving them to instant articles, right? Like the recirc is very, very bad on instant articles. If you send them there, you're maybe going to have 1.2, 1.4 pages per entrance from Facebook. If you send them to your mobile site and your mobile site is very optimized and personalized and slick, you could easily get 3 page views on average. And that really depends on obviously what kind of content you're writing and what your monetization strategy is. Like maybe page views in and of themselves are not the end goal for your organization, but it is like the place where we can start to think about how we optimize. So impressions times click-through rate equals entrances, entrances times pages per entrance equals page views, and then entrances divided by users on a monthly basis equals loyalty, the way that we think about it. And that really informs the way that we report. And I think there's 3 tactical levers to think about with regard to that. So promotion, distribution, and packaging. Each of them kind of lines up to an adaptation that we've made. So transforming our communications planning process. So that's the first D, is design campaigns with deconstructed plans. Second is transforming distribution. So distributing content in a way that'll minimize friction. Some of that is UX, some of that is on marketing. And some of it's actually on production, video production as well. And then transforming development where it is largely a video question, video and edit, but there's a much more cross-disciplinary opportunity to work together. But the first of those is this idea of deconstructed planning. So there's really 3 parts to that. So this is where it starts to be a little bit analytic-y. We continually measure the reach of each content type by network. So we're looking at link posts, photos. We're looking at IAs versus driving to site, AMP versus driving to site, trying to figure out where we can get the most value. And then we're benchmarking paid and organic against the cost of content. So we're saying, if it's ever cheaper to buy an incremental page view, then we're going to buy an incremental page view versus commission new content. We do have an annuity formula that we think about content with. So like, what is this going to be worth in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years? Generally though, like that fast incremental content that you would be putting out is going to be fast incremental content. And it's probably going to have a relatively short shelf life unless you can think of something else to do with it. And then the third is to back out content strategy from the desired metrics. This is the biggest deal on paid, like on branded campaigns, but it's really true across the board, especially when you have like a big video initiative or something where you've got to put some support behind it. It's a combination of thinking like, how much do I need to buy? How much do I need to make? How many assets do I need to test to reliably find one hit in the bunch? And that's really where we've tried to learn more. And it's because, like I've said 50 times already, like ad-supported publishers are losing ground. So 42% decline this year, but between 13 and 14, there was a 50% decrease in reach as well. So So we're like a tiny sliver of what we used to get in terms of reach. Our click-through rates have gone up, and across the board in Facebook, as they've learned more about people, those click-through rates have gone up. But ultimately, we're making up that shortfall with paid. And that farther exacerbates everything that's wrong with that Facebook ecosystem, right? Like the publisher isn't getting organic reach because they're competing with video and paid. So we make more video and then we put money behind things, which then makes there be less and less and less available inventory for publishers. It is really dumb, but we can't, the short of forming some kind of cartel, there's no way to be like, we're gonna all agree not to do this or that. Like, so there's an element of the tragedy that commons to this entire thing because like we could all be in a position to do better, but it's not gonna be organic traffic from Facebook. And then on the branded side, I think, just making sure that that we are not distributing branded content with our owned channels to the extent that like someone thinks that they're gonna find an ad when they see an Onion post. Like that is our goal is to make sure that you think of Onion content as really funny, good stuff and not necessarily ad stuff. But there's actual math behind that too, because like we'll get on average 19,000 link clicks on an editorial post. We'll get 600 link clicks on a branded post. And by and large, this year we've actually stopped putting out branded content on social media other than video, where we're buying on a cost per view basis. But when we think about leveraging paid, I think like there's an element like you have to be sanguine about like what is possible within your organization, given your CMS, given everything about your stack, because user clicks an ad, pays a penny, you get $4 from the RPM of that page they landed on, you're losing money. And if you're doing it at scale, you're losing money at scale. Where we've kind of adapted around that is, so somebody comes on site, they scroll, they see that first article, pass some detritus, and then they find an amazing sponsored post. That sponsored post in the second position, though, is like kind of the key to making the paid work in the first place, right? So we are leveraging arbitrage to whatever degree that we can. And that arbitrage is not easy to achieve at all. So if you imagine that same user clicks for a penny, comes in for first page view, $4, second page view is that sponsored post, so $10. And then if that person makes it past the sponsored post, and God, I hope they do, then we have another piece of editorial content in that third position. And sometimes that math changes, right? Like we're looking for users who will definitely leave if they find a sponsored post in the second position and then put it in the third position, put it in the fourth position. But the goal is really to break even on a branded click. So to do that, automation is really vital. You cannot see this on this screen, but unfortunately, there's like 10,000 ad sets to spend like $400 in this instance, which is a lot of ads. Like no human, like no matter how good they are, is ever gonna make you 10,000 ad sets. So you're gonna need to find some way to make that quicker. And for us, it's this idea of the virtuous circle. So going around, basically somebody posts something from an RSS feed that includes some UTMs. Those UTMs pass through to Facebook. Facebook UTMs pass to our traffic buying platform. The traffic buying platform sees the UTM and it triggers a rule. And it says, if I see this UTM, basically, I'm gonna create an ad set with this much money for this long that goes to this combination of different groups of people. We test with, sometimes hundreds of different audiences to see where it's cheapest. And then as quickly as we can, we kill each campaign. And by and large, there's no opportunity for arbitrage. There's rarely an opportunity for arbitrage. But you set up this whole machine so that you can get as much as you possibly can out of the content that you actually have. And then once somebody reaches the site again, you have inside of the UTM from the ad a packaging ID that says, what are the ads, what is the experience that I want to give somebody when they reach the site? Like, what are they going to find when they get there? So that is that first idea. Our second idea is really transforming distribution itself. So principles of distributed content, and you know, like this year versus last year, I think there's like an element of like dirty word to this whole thing, right? Like, because we've all been burned by Facebook and Twitter and several other social networks in the last year. But it's still really important for us to be big in these external platforms, all of us. Like, it doesn't really matter where you're at. Like, the biggest opportunity for people to see your stuff is still on Facebook. It's still with video. So whatever the strategy that you kind of go forward with there, that is like a real opportunity. So we think ComScore is not important for media planning anymore. Part of it is that chart I showed where it's really about minutes, not about unique users. It's not about page views. We also believe that all views are created equal. The thought there being social views are just as valid as on-site views. There may be less intent behind them, but they're still real. And paid views are just as valid as organic views. And obviously every newsroom has a different idea about how true that second part is. But to me, like, people are not seeing this work if it doesn't come out through that paid channel. So like, just cutting off that limb for the sake of purity is probably not a long-term strategy. There may be something that replaces paid on Facebook for sure, or paid on Twitter, or paid anywhere. But it is really difficult to stay super pure in this environment. The other thing is that when we think about distributed content, we really try to like let that guide our content strategy. So we have 3 different buckets of video. So we're looking for evergreen hits, higher cost per minute assets. These are usually really short assets, therefore. But they're things that we know we can bank for a really long period of time. We'll run something like Hurricane Ashley every year. It's an old ONN skit, and that does millions and millions of views. This year with Facebook ad break, it made us a couple $1,000s as well. So that's kind of one goal. The other is hot takes, and this is something more kind of unique to the news side of our organization, because we're generally not fast enough to have a hot take. I'll show you one next that is a little bit like what our format of a hot take looks like. But these are things with a short shelf life, burn hot, get them out quickly. And then the last is always on. So these are content types that we'll go through in the third of 3Ds that should kind of have that value. This is from the convention. We were populating for the entirety of most of the speeches, like a lower third or one of these sidebar chyrons. And they become like a joke box that we can just populate with whatever we have in a quick turn.
It is my great honor to present the next First Lady.
Another example just of that distributed content, we did a Facebook Live from an election booth that went out across a bunch of different channels, but just a really great piece. You can't tell, but our film critic down there on the left is on the phone talking in Russian. So that's another example of just like, you know, what do these distributed content types look like? How do we think about them? The third is this, did you know? So this is a content type that really only exists in Facebook stories, but like, it's something that we can make and then insert as like shoulder content basically between other types of pieces when we construct something longer and more modular, and it's really easy to distribute. Like, we can use a template to make that in 15 minutes, right? So like the example of the convention stuff, it's something that we can populate really quickly. And in that like last couple years, we've seen this gigantic increase in video views that has come from that. And partly that is paid, to be honest. Partly that is making way more video. And partly that's Facebook wants more video. Because I think, if you look back, especially to 2013, you're really just looking at YouTube primarily in terms of meaningful video distribution. But we're nowhere, even at the portfolio level, where we need to be. Because we're still teeny tiny, as are a lot of the other guys. So, whether it's Vice or Vox or Time, we're all kind of like dwarfs next to BuzzFeed, next to some of these other players. And the importance there, if it's not monetized, is dubious, right? Other than just it communicates importance and value in the marketplace. But it's that communication that helped us land this, which is Dr. Jim. So this was a campaign we ran with Intel and the PC Consortium, and it was a series that you would watch on Facebook sequentially.
Eric, you say your wife walked out on you after she caught you sleeping in a recliner with World War II documentaries playing on your old clunky computer?
Things got dark, I admit, but MacArthur is just so fascinating.
Is that a flip phone?
I am interested in taking your survey.
So you get this,
Eric,
you get the picture. The ability for us to tell that story about really big video numbers was what led us to the opportunity to make a lot of money with Keenan and Intel. Because they knew that we were capable of distributing at that level, and that was why we did it. There is no pot of gold at the end of that Facebook video rainbow, I don't think. That is not, there's no immediate payout other than the odd opportunity like that comes along. But it is still an important piece of the mix, even in, I think, 2018. We may spend less money on that, more money on the arbitrage stuff in 2018, proportionally. But I think there's still room to grow. Then the last piece is this principles of derivative content. Derivative content, I think, is probably the most operative at this, at where we are in 2017 going into 2018. These are the things that I think will be most important, at least for us next year. But we try now to create content modularly so that it can be easily versioned. We bake that into the production process, into the editorial process for as much stuff as we can. Generally, that means a change to a video product, not a written product. Our kind of written feature types are honed on a different path than things we do in video, because I think a lot of those formats are more durable. There's also less room for experimentation without a lot of product money. But the video side especially, we're really trying to serve a distinct audience with different cuts of the same thing, because we can't afford to make 55 versions of every single asset. So the third piece here is just that we don't make more than we need. So if we think we have enough, then we stop for the month, right? Both in terms of total assets and total number of views. We stop not necessarily making them because the production machine rumbles on, but we try to bank as much as we can after a certain point. Then we also think about where and how things are going to be consumed. So there's an axis of active to passive. So did I go onto YouTube and search for something, or am I on the bus and watching a Facebook video? And then from planned, again, I sat down for the night to watch something on Hulu versus I am on the go and happen to see this really interesting news video. And those, I think, are as important of sorting factors as shortest to longest. And I think just as organizations, I think journalistic organizations tend to think about something based on word count still, more or less. And shortest to longest is not necessarily a really good filter. But I think as you think about how that comes to life, there's 3 different versions that you could see in how this is done. One is Insider, which I think is primarily a text and video approach to thinking about, like, we'll take Business Insider verticals, pull them all into one place, put it out again, right? Like, not necessarily my favorite strategy, but it is a effective strategy, because people who would never read Business Insider would maybe read this new thing they've never heard of called Insider. With Tasty, I think, creating content in a number of different formats off of the same platform, off of the same group of people. You build a test kitchen, basically, and a couple food photographers, and you're in business. The last is Cheddar. And I think Cheddar, they have a partnership now with our holding company, but what's interesting to me about them in the context of this derivative content is they've got a live program with cut downs. The cut downs themselves become the marketing for the live program. And then there's a paid version of the live programming and a free version of that live program. And all of that becomes pretty meaningful. How that all plays out, I think, is kind of interesting, though, because there's a breakdown between monetizable stuff and non-monetizable stuff. So the monetizable stuff, on-site Facebook ad break, so has to be after 21 seconds. And has to be certain categories of content. Facebook Watch, ditto, like an even more exclusive club. Twitter Amplify Open and Premium, pre-roll, whereas these are both mid-roll. This is pre-roll. This is generally pre-roll. Non-monetizable, you've got your feed video, your Twitter video in general, and your Instagram video, where there's really no way to make any money. But they're all important to communicate that value story, as well as to get the actual money out of people. So, we have here these yellow boxes represent an ad. Generally, these are 15s. Then here you've got basically an A segment. The way we think about what an A segment is it is a spoken version of a short form written story that is about 20 seconds long, so we can hit that mid-roll window and set up a meatier piece that has more value for the user. So there's like a carrot and stick approach. So like on Facebook ad break, the goal is to be, A, so here's the story, then throw. So we'll be right back after this with XYZ, and that's a modular piece you can take out because you're not going to want it in a place where you're not going to have an ad serve. Then the ad itself and a catch that again is modular. And then this B piece, that's, in a perfect world, always an interview or something else that has a lot of value for a user, because we don't want to disappoint people with these ads. And then that plays out, I think, in terms of something that looks like this. This is actually the template we're using for our new AV news program. So the form factor will be relatively consistent.
On the heels of Donald Trump calling any NFL player kneeling in protest during the national anthem a son of a bitch, which only bolstered the resolve of the players protesting, throngs of men took to their backyard Sunday and began incinerating the NFL garb they likely paid a pretty penny for. So here's some footage of the idiots burning the things they willingly paid money for. If you had books and or crosses as the first thing that would be burned post-Trump, I'm sorry, you lose MAGA bingo. Also, real talk, no adult man should wear a jersey unless they're actually on the team.
So then we go into the throw, basically.
Donald Trump in 3 words.
And we come back with a more formatted video. Just for the sake of time, I'll skip this one. This is another modular piece, though. So this is basically 5 headlines that we've sandwiched together into a single video asset that can basically just contribute a couple of thousand views on a Friday. But it's also a good piece for us to stick into a newsletter that we send out that contains each of these 5 stories in a clickable. That's the 3Ds of distribution. Like I said, I think these three ideas are really useful in this 2018 timeframe. In the future, though, there's this question of hope. Is there hope? I do think there is hope. There's 2 paths forward, though. So there's total reach lines of business, which I think we've talked about this entire time, right? These are basically ad-supported models. And then there's ARPU lines of business. If we think about ARPU lines of business, we're trying to grow per head revenue from the top 5% of users. If you work at a newspaper, you're very familiar with this already, but like this is something that's very new to publishers like us. And I don't think that there's a future without it. There's a million other ways to reach, different kinds of revenue. Like it doesn't necessarily have to be subscription. It can be events. It can be a commerce strategy like Gizmodo has. But it is clear that you need to basically climb this ladder. And this is like the last thing I'll leave you with, like, is this idea that, starting from the bottom here, your least valuable user is almost everybody, like they're not even on this chart. They're the people who are one and done. They come in when they see something they like and they go. If you can get them onto this ladder, it's getting them to sign up for something. A level above that is an app download. I would expand that really to say an app download or notifications, something like that just expands the number of touch points you have with them. One level above that is getting them to buy something through affiliate commerce. If you can get somebody to make one purchase, not only do you get the actual money from that, you also then have the ability to target them smartly yourself with more commerce offers that are in that same area when they're back on your site. One level above that is paid media subscription. I think that's really, really hard to pull off for most publishers that have not historically been a paid subscription. You really have to think through, like, what is that thing going to be? This is why you need these strategies if you don't currently have a subscription, because you're slowing down the future coming at you so that you can try to figure out, like, which of these things to hold on to, which of these opportunities to go after in what order. The one above that, I think, is a little bit easier to think about. You see a lot of this from the podcast companies. They're so good at getting you to go to live tapings, events like that. I think Atlantic has proved to be super smart about doing that as well. And then the top of the top is direct commerce. And if you can convert your publisher brand into a direct commerce brand, you are in a fantastic situation. I'll give you two examples. One is Tasty's hot plate thing that hooks up to the Tasty website. Basically kind of a sous vide idea, but like you're able to cook a recipe directly from their website with this piece of Tasty branded hardware. Another would be Vice has a beer brand, which they don't do a ton of promotion for, but it's one of these things that you can start to use the inventory you have for your own ends, and you'll be more profitable because you're ultimately taking a higher share of that revenue. Yeah, that is all I've got for you today. Does anybody have a question? Yeah.
So you talked a lot about video. Is your video actually truly, really seriously pinky swear profitable, or is it not?
It depends on the feature type, and it depends on which channel you're talking about. Overall, I would say that probably 60% of the videos that we do are currently profitable. That other 40% though, the key I think is less like 100% profitable as much as containing how much money the 40% that are always going to be unprofitable are, because I think a lot of times the things that people are most passionate about video-wise are the things that on an editorial team that do the worst from a money standpoint.
Thanks. Do you think there's any hope for several media companies, Spotify for news kinds of options, Blendle where people pay? I don't know if you're in there. If you know what Tony Hill's doing with Scroll, these new ways of making money from multiple. Yeah. You're part of other media organizations.
Yeah, I think we have a joint venture with Panoply that's kind of in that same neighborhood, I would argue as well. I think all of those things are good in the long term, like for your core products versus your podcasts. I think like the more control ultimately you have over the platform, at least in terms of revenue that you need, right? Like revenue that like will cover your employees. I think like that has to be as close to an owned channel as you can make it, or something at least under your control. I will jump on as many of those things as I can where I don't think I'm going to send somebody who would have otherwise been like a user anyway, like to some place where they're not going to get an incremental like couple of page views. Like we kicked IA off of our site for the most part because we couldn't control that research experience well enough.
You talked about how much time people spend on YouTube, and I'm just curious how actionable it is to use that to kind of drive traffic to your site.
I think YouTube is a really poor way to drive traffic to our site. It is a meaningful way, like so I think like there's a rev share on YouTube that is sometimes favorable if you're direct selling. I think you have to hit a tremendous amount of scale before that starts to become real. And even then you're competing there in a pool of like 15-year-olds who are always going to be more successful by virtue of just being able to churn out more content than your newsroom full of journalists.
And we have the last question.
I'm just kind of curious when you look at what you're in the entertainment space. So what Amazon has done and Netflix, they're now commissioning. They started off with distribution business. Now they commission their own works. Do you see that kind of danger with the Facebook and I mean, basically you're creating value. They're probably making more money than you are off your own videos. Could they just write us all out of the equation and start producing their own content?
They kind of already have. Like the Facebook Watch app, they just commissioned probably 20 shows, lower scale than a TV show per minute, but higher scale than most online video when they direct sell it. Same thing with Twitter TV. So I think that's here. I think the tier thing though is where to think about like what the opportunity for any individual organization is, because there's a big difference between the Amazon Prime rate where I put my content on Amazon Prime, 16 cents a minute versus, 16 cents an hour. And think about like short form assets. That's a lot of watches, like a lot of views to get that money, versus some direct deal where the long-term catalog value is the ultimate driver for the organization. We actually, I didn't talk about it today, but we have Onion Studios, which is our long-form production arm. So that's another area that we're playing. Albeit, I think like it's much more like the direct sold display business, right? Like feast and famine. So you could go 2 years and not sell anything, or like we sold 5 pictures last year. So I think it's a difficult place to make money compared to some of these other ones.